Please remember to like and subscribe for more fanfics. Enjoy.
Apologies for the long wait. I had tried to get the program to record and the recordings wouldn't save. But I have changed programs and I will be posting again. Thank you and enjoy chapters 17 and 18 of Coil. Coil, by Allegory for Hatred. This is book 2 of Magic and Mystery. All rights go to Allegory for Hatred. I do not own this story. Chapter 17, Home. In the center of the desk, a leather-bound diary sat in perfect stillness. Though it had been handled with excess care, the spine was broken and the pages yellowed. A beam of light caught on it. The book seemed to glow. Well? Dazai blinked out of his silent musings. He turned to Draco, who was watching him with an anxious expression. Well, what? Draco huffed, then kicked forward until he was just a foot away from the desk. Despite the edge to his whole demeanor, however, Dazai noticed he made a point to not get too close to Ginny's diary. What now? Getting the diary is what my father wants from you, right? We're done now? Are you going to have Featherbrain ship that to your boss? Blaze asked. Even though we're pretty sure this is what Lucius wants. Dazai trailed off with a hum. He leaned forward on a palm, deep in thought. Usually Dazai wasn't one to hesitate about conclusions like this. But Dazai let his senses run over the diary. And although the office was always abuzz with magical energy, the diary seemed to be giving off none of it. Well, that wasn't entirely accurate. The diary had magic, but it had no more than any random wizard Dazai could pass in the halls might. Compared to the Philosopher's Stone and the Sensing Stone, this thing barely qualified as magical at all. But it wasn't the nearly imperceptible magic that was bothering Dazai, nor was it the uncertainty of a job well done. What was bothering Dazai was that the diary felt more like a person than an artifact. Dazai? What do you mean pretty sure? I thought we were done. For the second time in as many minutes, Dazai startled out of his thoughts. This time, Draco's worry was replaced with irritation. Dazai rolled his shoulders tightly. The muscle clicked. Our research was solid. Now it's just a matter of verifying things. I'm not sure any of our reputations could handle being blamed for another petrification, Blaze said. Draco winced at the comment. Waiting to see if another one happens is risky. Dazai nodded, eyes flicking to Blaze appreciatively as he spoke. So we won't wait around. He tapped a gloved finger on the book's peeling cover. There wasn't really any magic there to nullify, but Dazai wasn't taking any chances. The gloves would stay on just in case. Remember what Ginny said the other day? Evidently, he tapped the book again in point. This ugly little thing can talk. Draco reeled back immediately. You can't seriously be planning to write in it. Dazai made a face. He looked to Blaze for support, only to find... That's an awful idea, Dazai. What? He stuttered. Aren't you supposed to be on my side, Blaze? You're my second. What's with all this hostility? I'm being pragmatic. Blaze lifted his chin to watch Dazai through pointed eyes. And you're doing something recklessly self-sacrificial again. This book corrupted Ginny. It can corrupt you too. You think so? Dazai asked, almost hopeful. Getting corrupted is kind of like dying, isn't it? She only lost her memories, Blaze countered. Dazai sighed. Draco scoffed. He stared down at the book, then back to Dazai, derisive. Writing in the book that made the Weasley girl go nuts is the definition of self-sacrificial. It's like you want to be its next victim. Dazai considered this for a moment. Then, he shook his head. You're both missing the point, he said, ignoring the twin looks of disappointment he got in return. For one, I won't be using it for no good reason, like Ginny was. Since it's for a job, I'll stay on top of things. Second, it probably used magic to corrupt her. Seeing as I can't be affected by magic, I'll be fine. Blaze softened at that, but Draco still didn't look convinced. And third, Dazai continued, crooning, I have you two looking out for me. If I start zoning out and walking around covered in blood, it's up to Blaze and Draco to fix me. Draco raised a brow. You were zoning out just a minute ago. Blaze nodded, entirely deadpan. I've seen you do both of those things before, boss. On multiple occasions. Dazai coughed into his fist. Right, well, starting now, you're absolutely hopeless. You love me anyway. Draco sputtered, his cheeks dusting over pink. Blaze stifled a laugh at the reaction. Dazai wasn't so kind, and cackled loudly. The light atmosphere only stayed for a moment longer, however. Once their laughter died down, a heavy-set tension settled in the air. Their eyes all fell to the diary at once. Right, down to business. Dazai drew in a breath. Then, with a methodical hand he usually reserved for Mori's surgical experiments, Dazai carefully gripped the diary's cover and opened it. The first page was blank. Blank? Draco asked, already leaning over the desk again. Whatever trepidation he'd held before was either gone now, or temporarily put on hold. I thought Ginny said she wrote in it all the time. Figures she was lying. Blaze came up on his side. Not necessarily. It could have a self-erasing charm. A quick flip through the book revealed every page to be empty of text, Ginny's handwriting or otherwise. The diary's cracked spine was the only indication anyone had ever opened it at all. Dazai considered for a second, before deciding on a course of action. He grabbed a quill from the desk, daubed it in ink, and hovered it over the page. Only one way to find out. He peered up to Draco and Blaze. Anything you want to tell it? Ask if my father... Draco suddenly squeaked to a halt. No, I'm not talking to a book. That's got to be below me, right? Blaze, is this below me? Blaze hummed. Tell it to stop being evil. Horrible ideas, both of you, Dazai said. We'll go with my plan, then... Draco sniffed, looking embarrassed. I want it on the record that I think this is an awful idea. I concur. Dazai rolled his eyes, dully noted. Without further ado, he set the quill to paper. Ink bled out from the point of contact. As neatly as he could print, Dazai wrote, Hello! Anyone home in here? The black ink seemed to soak up immediately, and a second passed without any response. Over the desk, Draco squinted to read the words upside down. When he did, Dazai, what kind of casual question is that? Dazai guffawed. I don't want to scare it off. Making friends with the evil book isn't any better than Blaze's idea. It's hardly any worse. Suddenly, the office door clicked. The three Slytherins immediately tensed up. Dazai was the first to react, swiping the diary off the desk and throwing it on his lap just as the door swung open. Unless someone were to crawl under the desk, they wouldn't notice the diary's presence. It was hidden under the long sleeves of his robes and the wood desktop. A frantic glance from Draco and Blaze showed they were just as worried about the diary being spotted. Dazai offered them a thin-lipped, reassuring smile in response. All's well, that smile seemed to say. Not a second later, Fred, George, Hermione, and Ron appeared at the doorway. Upon seeing Draco, Blaze, and Dazai already present, they blinked, startled. Equally surprised faces stared back at them. Fred and George shook of the shock quickly. They beamed. What's this? A secret snake gathering? And we weren't invited? Draco scowled and Blaze merely shrugged. For his part, Dazai offered a flippant grin. You know how Slytherins are, always lying and keeping secrets. Ron snorted as he made his way across the room. He flopped into the sofa with an umph. Hermione sat next to him a few seconds later. Is that Dazai lecturing us about house politics? Now I know something is up. Dazai rolled his eyes, exasperated. Really, boss, Fred chirped. If you lot are planning some kind of Slytherin scheme we want in, just pretend we're not Gryffindor. I promise not to spread any nasty snake secrets we learn. Cross my heart. Hope to... We were just talking, Draco snapped. Across the room, Fred and George feigned hurt at the harsh tone. Mind your business. Before anyone could get another word in, and sincerely hoping to mitigate any potential fighting, Dazai cleared his throat. Everyone turned to him at once. How have sales been lately? The twins perked up, but not nearly as brightly as Ron did. Fantastic, Ron said. He was practically bouncing in his seat. Then, as self-declared bookkeeper for this operation, he confidently declared, We made nearly double on this week's test compared to what we were making at the start of the semester. He bounded over to the chalkboard to write down their earnings. He circled the sum with a grin. "Sure did," Fred said proudly. While scrabbling around his cloak's inner pocket, George told them, enough galleons to fund a very expensive, Hogwarts-wide prank, or split it 7 ways even. As he spoke, George withdrew several clumsy handfuls of gold, silver, and bronze coins. He unloaded them onto Dazai's desk. Metallic clanks echoed noisily around the room. When the racket finally stopped, Dazai plucked a sickle from the pile and rolled it between his fingers. Blaze leaned forward to eye the cash with some interest, though Draco looked more concerned with how gracelessly George had handled the coins. Needing no further instruction, Draco started to rearrange the pile into something more orderly. It wasn't long before the bulk of their returns became apparent. This was a good haul. Ron hadn't been kidding. Sure, it was nothing compared to the Dough-port Mafia raked in every day. But for Hell's Hound's first real job, a smashing success. Dazai couldn't help but to preen with pride. He'd assigned his friends a task, and then accomplished it in bounds. He'd like to see Father do that. These days it felt more like Mori was the boss than Father. "Hey." Dazai flicked his sickle. It spun several times in the air before he caught it again. Blaze was glancing between the coins in the far corner of the room. When Dazai followed his gaze, he found Egg lazily watching their exchange. A curl of smoke rose up from her nose, but otherwise she didn't spare them any action. Egg isn't the type of dragon that hoards gold, is she? Fred and George stiffened at the question. They took a wary step away from the pile, needing no further reason to back off than giving a feral dragon her space. Dazai tossed the coin again. "Nah," he said, eyeing the listless dragon. She looked tired, and Dazai felt some level of sympathy for her because of it. He'd had enough sleepless nights to ache at just the thought. "Speaking of Egg, I was thinking about taking her home over break." Surprised silence answered him. Ron shook his head, and a second later he was standing. "You're taking her home? But she lives here. She's my dragon," Draco protested at the same time. "She was mine first." Dazai glanced between them. "Either of you could take her if you want." At their affronted expressions, Dazai sighed. "Her growth will be stunted if we keep her cooped up in here forever. I think some time to fly free would make her more ferocious. Ferocious, as if a feral dragon wasn't the last thing Dazai needed. To be honest, Egg wasn't exactly Dazai's proudest moment. Really, Dazai had only raised her to get one up on Quirrell. And now that Quirrell was out of the way, Egg was turning into something of a problem. Dazai had half a mind to kill her. That would take care of the issue that was secretly rearing a dragon. But Dazai's gang liked her. And maybe Dazai also. He shook the thought away like it was dandelion fluff. Couldn't have Featherbrain getting any more jealous now. Regardless, he probably wouldn't be killing the dragon. Dazai turned an eye onto Draco. He rolled the sickle over his knuckles showy. Then he palmed it, and the coin vanished from sight. "Assuming Lucius doesn't throw a fit, you're welcome to take her back." Draco blinked, momentarily startled out of his glare. "I can't just bring a dragon home, Dazai." "Why not? You did it last year." Dazai blew a raspberry. "Besides," he added, just quietly enough that only Draco would hear, "I'm sure Lucius would love to house Egg again, if I'm the one asking." Draco stared at him. There was a suddenly serious set to his face, as if the mention of Port Mafia's involvement with Lucius was enough alone to curdle his whole mood. Dazai opened his mouth to soothe over the sore wound, but before he could get even one word out, Blaze let out an objecting, soft hum. "You're going home for winter break?" Dazai tilted his head. Just on the other side of the desk, Blaze was eyeing him, expression guarded. That contemplative look immediately had Dazai on edge. Blaze, when he had something to say, could be a real menace. "I was planning on it," Dazai said as he finally pocketed the sickle. It made a heavy weight of his robe's front pocket. "Really?" Ron asked. "You stayed here last year." Fred and George nodded enthusiastically, but there was something considering in their eyes as well. That's right. We had a holiday party and everything. We harassed Hagrid too, remember? Ah, good times, Dazai huffed, fondly amused. Certainly, last year's winter break had been some kind of ordeal. Dazai's life at Hogwarts hadn't known peace since. Though, had it ever really? I only stayed last year to practice magic with Quirrell, Dazai told them. He pointedly ignored how most everyone present recoiled at the professor's name. Even though they knew most of the story behind Quirrell's death, Dazai supposed it must still be jarring to talk to a murderer. He sniffed, suddenly feeling soured on the subject. Anyway, Mori wants me home this time. So said the letter he'd received just this morning. In light of his progress on Lucius's assignment, Dazai was to return home. To discuss, or plan, or just try on Mori's newest pretty dresses, Dazai had no clue. Seeing as Mori's letter had alluded to all three, it was anyone's guess. Dazai hardly had the patience for it. Yokohama's ports grew cold in the winter. The wind carried frigid sea air on its breath and filled the docks with that unbearable kind of frozenness Dazai detested. But Hogwarts was cold already, too. Dazai supposed it would be the same wherever he went. Bony fingers cold and chapped. He shifted the robe tighter over his shoulders at just the thought. Ugh, Ron moaned, slumping back into the sofa. Here I was hoping you'd stay. There won't be anyone to hang out with this time. It'll be so boring, Dazai chuckled. I thought you'd appreciate not having me around to rope you into schemes. Aw, don't say that, Snakey. Fred and George collapsed into Ron's sides. They practically smothered him, and earned a loud yelp in response for their efforts. Ronnie here secretly loves your plans. George poked his younger brother in the side. Ron squeaked. And what do you mean boring? You'll have us hanging around. Righto, little bro. Ron flailed against them fruitlessly. You two don't count. I'll be going home as well, Hermione said. She was leaning away from the Weasley brother dog pile, looking somehow both fond and annoyed with their antics. What about you two, then? Draco gave a polite smile. The Malfoy family hosts a winter ball every year. Naturally, I'll be attending. I'm going home, Blaise told them. Of course you are. The party would be boring without you. Hermione looked between them, then chuckled a little sadly. You'll be together. I'm a bit jealous. You can fly out to Japan if you want to visit me. Now that's an idea, Hermione mused warmly. If. An impractical one. Dazai shrugged. Of course his offer hadn't been serious in the slightest. Not just anyone was allowed inside Yokohama's borders. Not without great fuss, at least. And somehow Dazai doubted a friendly visit would be a particularly compelling story for the bigwigs governing Yokohama. Regardless. Anyway, he said, drawing everyone's focus back on him. Even Fred and George stopped messing around with Ron when he spoke. While you lot figure out where Egg is going, I have a class to get to. Right. Your special class with Professor Snape. You're still doing those? Dazai raised a brow. Last I checked. With a practiced ease, Dazai pulled open the desk's drawer. In the same motion he pulled a textbook out. He slipped the diary in. Then he locked it. Snape is such a worrywart about magical safety. George snorted. Does he know you call him Snape? He does, Dazai grinned as he stood. And he's less than pleased about it. Nice. I'm working my way up to Severus, he told them. The twins laughed. A chuckle even surprised itself out of Hermione's lips at his boldness. She shook herself a second after, as if ashamed to find Dazai's teasing so amusing. Her expression sobered. These lessons with Professor Snape, they aren't like your lessons with Quirrell, are they? Dazai blinked. Around him, the rest of the gang suddenly paused as well. If you mean, Dazai said, is he using our class as a means to get information from me? Hermione nodded. Or hurt you, she said, voice tight like she hadn't wanted to voice that thought aloud. Information, definitely, Dazai told them. Blasé. Hurt me, no. He'd have to be an idiot not to notice that Snape was prodding him for information. About Yokohama. About Mori. But Dazai got the feeling Snape was just being a worrywart about it. He'd never been led to believe the potion's master was actually sniffing out the Port Mafia. He was a mild nuisance more than anything. Something to clear up after winter break, once all this diary nonsense was taken care of. Fred and George shared a look. "Snape Eye wants info from you? Don't tell me you're snitching to him," Fred gasped, faux devastated. Dazai raised a brow. "What about our latest money-making scheme?" He gestured to the neatly stacked pile of coins on the desk. "Only if you want me to turn myself in," he teased. "Then, he hasn't even realized about it yet. Calm down." Hermione let out a tight, relieved breath at that. Meanwhile, the twins chuckled. Dazai eyed the group for a second, before standing. The diary was safe. The gang was caught up. Deciding not to dawdle any longer, Dazai walked to the exit. He said a quick goodbye to everyone, paying neither Blaise nor Draco any special attention. He trusted Hell's Hounds well enough, but that didn't mean he wanted to risk the other members' suspicions, still. Not when he was so close. Something caught on the door before it could swing shut. Dazai pulled back from the door as he turned to see what had happened. Blaise had grabbed the hidden door just seconds before it could close. The toe of his boot had wedged into the gap, holding it open. Dazai blinked at him. He waited for Blaise to shut the door behind them before saying, "I don't need an escort this time. I don't think. Your confidence is inspiring, boss." Dazai waved his book around lamely. He didn't know why he still brought the stupid thing to class, other than to look busy when Snape glared his way. It was an interesting read for all the day it took him to pick through it. "What do you mean, Blaise made a face. He didn't object when Dazai started walking again, only saddled up beside him. They picked, though, mostly empty halls, by now well used to the stares sent their way. "Going home for winter break, Dazai shot him a passive glance. "That's what you followed me out here about?" "It is," Dazai hummed. "I am. I need to pass on you-know-what to Mori. Get information on what my next job will be. Boring stuff like that. Blaise will understand when he gets a job someday. Unless you want to be a house husband?" "It hadn't occurred to me," Blaise said. "Consider it. You're very good at doting." Blaise sniffed out a quiet laugh, but his typical demeanor was back within the second. "You know, you don't have to go home if you don't want to." Dazai glanced at him. "Aren't you listening? I have things due to back there." "I mean," Blaise said, staring forward blankly, "wouldn't you prefer to stay here over break? Do something horrible with the twins again?" Dazai considered this. Then, he hastily shook his head. What a weird question. Blaise should know better than to ask something like this. I don't say it to be mean. Blaise is always saying mean things. Blaise hummed, evidently too used to Dazai's prods by now to react any other way. "It's the things you say, and the little things you do." His steady gaze turned onto Dazai, hovering pointedly over bandaged wrists. "That make me think you don't like home very much." Dazai's shoulders drew upwards. "I don't like much of anything." Blaise glanced at him. The discomfort must have been clear across Dazai's entire being, because he pulled back. "I only mean, I like to think I know you pretty well. I'd think you would prefer to stay here, rather than with someone you clearly don't like. Prefer to stay." Dazai sighed, tired. The idea rankled against his brain, sour for all it was true. Hanging around Mori or his friends? The choice was obvious for Dazai. One grated on every last one of his nerves, and the other was always a promise for fun. Sly smile and sharp words, or friendly banter and secret glances. The discrepancy left something to be desired. "But that's not how the world works at all, Blaise," Dazai said with growing impatience. "Anyway, I do important stuff for the Port Mafia, you know. To leave Mori scrambling without me would be entertaining. Evil." Blaise came to a sudden stop, and Dazai nearly tripped to stop with him. "Aren't you already a villain, Dazai?" Blaise asked, serious. "Everyone here seems to think so." "Then I think you should choose to be selfish about going home or not." Blaise trailed off. Then, before Dazai could make sense of his meaning, Blaise inclined his head towards Snape's office. "We're here." "Oh." Dazai blinked. "Really?" Blaise nodded. I think you still need an escort after all, boss. Have a good lesson. Cryptic as ever, second, Dazai called after him. He watched Blaze walk for another few seconds, before deciding to finally make his entrance in Snape's office. He wasn't that late, all things considered, but Snape could still be a stickler when he wanted to be. Choose to be selfish, huh? Wasn't he already doing that? Dazai turned on his heels, steps purposeful and clacking on the tile. He threw open the door. Snape, I'm here for my lesson. He cheered and slammed the door at his back. The bang was loud enough to rattle potions. Snape swore, hastily reaching out to grab a green potion before it could fall off his desk. Dazai nearly laughed, but he stopped short upon realizing Madame Pomfrey was sitting in on this class as well. She was watching their exchange with an exasperated sort of expression. Mr. Dazai, what have I said about calling me that? And don't make such a... Dazai plopped down into his seat with a vocal oomph. He kicked Snape's desk while crossing his legs. Ruckus. Snape groaned. His brow twitched. You're in a mood today. Dazai tilted his head. Oh? I didn't know Snape was so attentive of me. Snape grit his teeth, looking about a second from popping a blood vessel somewhere vital. I'm just kidding, sir, Dazai soothed half-heartedly. Snape didn't look convinced. A friend suggested I try and be more selfish. Since I wanted to annoy Snape today, I decided to commit to it. Don't take advice from the Weasley twins. Dazai grinned, but didn't correct his professor. Instead, he cheekily prodded, You're only upset I won our bet over Quidditch the other day. Snape eyed him for a moment. Only once he was certain Dazai was going to behave himself did Snape finally release his iron-tight grip on the potion. He set it down beside a stack of student essays Dazai hadn't participated in. Pomfrey cleared her throat, expression distinctly amused. Now, you two. Snape shot her a glare. Dazai smiled pleasantly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his thighs. Madame Pomfrey is here today again. Are we finally moving on to a cooler spell? Snape looked like he wanted to scold Dazai again, but Pomfrey was quicker to the chase. Based on my observations, I do believe you're ready to move on to more powerful spells, she said, voice warm. Dazai perked up in interest. Perhaps some basic transfiguration would interest you? Regardless of what interests him, that's what he's learning next. Snape trampled over Dazai's excitement. Like match to needle? Dazai asked. He recalled trying to learn that particular spell last year, and failing spectacularly. That had been so early in the year. Dazai hadn't even been able to conjure up the magic to make himself ill. The match had just stubbornly sat there, pointless. Snape nodded. He reached into his desk and withdrew a matchbook. Then he plucked out 2 matchsticks and set them on the desk. Dazai grinned, pleased with himself for having guessed correctly. He drew his wand out without needing to be told. Not so fast. Snape held up a hand. Dazai deflated. We'll start with an example, Snape said as he pulled his own wand out. Dazai followed the movement carefully. An example would be helpful, though he'd spent the better part of 1.5 years feeling classmates cast transfiguration spells, and didn't know how necessary it was. Transfiguration spells all had fundamentally the same magical signature, he thought. But Dazai had only ever tried casting once. A refresher might be useful. Snape watched him, waiting for Dazai's affirming nod before casting. Instinctively, Dazai perked up as magic swirled to life in the air. The match elongated and sharpened at the point. It shifted color, from a woody brown to a shiny silver. The transformation only lasted for a few seconds, but Dazai could still feel the magic zapping around it for a moment more. Same old feeling. Dazai could replicate that. He glanced to Snape before lifting his own wand, wanting express permission lest he draw the professor's ire again. Snape and Pomfrey shared a glance. It wasn't until Pomfrey's quill was hovering over her notes that Snape gave him the go-ahead. Dazai paid them no mind. By now he was well used to Pomfrey documenting their classes. The scrutiny would only put him on edge if he let it. But her notes were mostly medical in nature, and therefore not of much concern to him. It wasn't like they were actually going to be able to deduce no longer human's existence. Dazai waved his wand in the same tight motion Snape had. He focused his magic in that familiar shape transfiguration took, something revolving and strange. It swirled up at the tip of his wand and the match rolled. Dazai stared down at it. That should have worked. Everything felt right, so why? Do you need another example? Pomfrey asked, drawing Dazai from his blistering thoughts. Her quill had stalled over the paper, and Dazai frowned at it in offense. No, he grumbled. Maybe if he focused more on the chemical composition of the match needle. Nothing. Dazai grit his teeth. This feeling of repeated failure was annoyingly familiar. Wasn't he past this by now? He tried casting again, and while the magic around them changed shape, the match did not. Snape's own needles seemed to mock him. Snape, once more, held up a hand to stop Dazai from casting again. Let's try something else. Dazai rubbed his fingers along his wand's grain. I don't need to try a different spell. I just need to figure out which part I'm doing wrong. It wasn't the shape or the feel of the magic. Dazai was certain that was correct. And it wasn't as if he didn't remember all of the basic transfiguration matrices. Transfiguration didn't have a corresponding verbal cast, so he wasn't failing to pronounce anything correctly either. Snape grunted a sound of acknowledgement. I don't mean a different spell. Dazai blinked. You don't? Pomfrey's quill tapped thoughtfully against the page. Both Snape and Dazai turned their attentions to her. How about we try to walk through it together? She asked. Then, with a quick glance to her notes, she continued, Mr. Dazai, just what magical sensation are you attempting to replicate when you cast this spell? Magic buzzed incessantly in Dazai's ears. Snape pinched the bridge of his nose. Don't act coy, he groaned. That's how you've been casting until now, isn't it? Pomfrey asked. Observing the magic being cast around you and recreating it? Defensive, Dazai leaned away from the desk, but that slight motion was answer enough. Snape looked, briefly, exhausted. As we thought. Problem child. If you'd explained how you were working earlier, we could have shaped our lessons around your method ages ago. You're truly impressive to use your magical sensitivity in such a way, Pomfrey said. Dazai shifted uncomfortably at the praise. Though I have to agree, why did you keep it a secret when we could have used this information to help you? They both stared him down, evidently waiting for an answer. Dazai bristled, the words because I don't trust you weighing on his tongue. He didn't voice them aloud. Instead, he leaned on the more comfortable persona of bumbling idiot. Is that something Snape would want to know? Snape grit his teeth. Yes. Well, you should have said something then. Dazai flapped a hand around. Here I was thinking you didn't care. Obviously I care, brat. Really? With all that barking and spitting, I thought you were the type to be angry all the time. Poppy cleared her throat. Dazai chose to interpret the fumbling gesture as amused rather than stern. Snape had enough sternness for the both of them. Mr. Dazai, she said, turning a quelling look onto him. Ah, not amused then. Dazai nodded her way to show he was listening, and Snape made an exaggerated sound once he was turned away. Pomfrey smiled, pleased. Describe how the match-to-needle spell feels for you. Perhaps if we can better understand how you learn, we can make this lesson more amenable for you. It doesn't matter. All transfiguration spells are about the same, Dazai grumbled. Already, he was wishing he could just bully Snape again. At least that was a productive exercise. I'm missing something else. Really? Pomfrey asked, sounding surprised. Dazai eyed the reaction curiously, but turned back to his match, rather than comment on it. In response, Dazai made a vague, turning motion with his hand. That more or less summed up transfiguration for him. Spinning, revolving, changing, like an age-old wheel. Manners, problem child. Dazai blinked. Right. To Snape and Pomfrey, that gesture probably just looked dismissive. He let his hand drop back into his lap with an unsatisfied flump. If you say so. If it wasn't chemical makeup or magical know-how, then what else was holding him back? Something else. Something fundamental, obviously, for him to still be struggling with it. Usually, figuring out the right magical signature was enough to get the spell casting properly. That, and the ability to not get a migraine. I do say so, Snape spat. Dazai brushed him off. I thought Professor McGonagall was the expert at transfiguration. What are you going to help with? Snape's jaw twitched. I assure you, my talents aren't limited to merely one subject. As the teacher here, I'd expect more respect. Sure, Dazai nodded patiently. You're only saying that because Professor McGonagall doesn't like me, right? She doesn't want to teach me herself? Pomfrey and Snape shared a glance. Then the matron cleared her throat. Let's try to stay focused, okay? She smiled. You said you think you're missing something. What part of the spell is lacking, Mr. Dazai? The part where it works. Clearly, Snape droned. Dazai shot him an unamused look. What part precisely, problem child? I don't know, Dazai grasped vaguely. At the air. Trying to grab onto that invisible something that would solve his spell. Predictably, no epiphany came to him. The magic was doing what it was supposed to. Changing shape just how Dazai wanted it to. But rather than do anything, the magic only flounced about. Completely useless, he said as much to Pomfrey and Snape. The matron hummed, the furrow between her brows telling Dazai she was considering his every word carefully. It was a little unnerving. You have that much control over the magic? She asked. When Dazai nodded, her contemplative expression only deepened. And it's still not working. But you aren't feeling sick, dear. Not at all. Dazai brushed off her concerns quickly. He had a good grasp on his magical limits. And between the start of the year and now, Dazai's limit had grown from one meager spell to several dozen. He wouldn't be sick for a while yet. More than just a lack of sickness, spells were coming easier to him as well. Wingardium Leviosa was mastered within one class. Then the wand-lighting charm the class after that. Nowadays it was just a matter of feel the spell, replicate the spell, call it a day. All the more reason why this current setback was cause for such frustration. Severus had a similar thoughtful mien about him. When you cast, he said, contemplative, what are you thinking about? Dazai tilted his head, wondering where this line of questioning was going. What was he thinking about? The spell, obviously. Magic was a simple 1-2 step of tell the magic what to do and make the magic do it. There wasn't anything else to think about. I'm not getting distracted, Dazai told him petulantly. I mean in regards to the spell, brat. I should hope you aren't letting your mind wander in the middle of class. Dazai made a face. I'm thinking, I better figure this spell out quickly or Snape is going to lecture me all weekend. Snape grit his teeth. Professor Snape. Sure. Him too. Now, you two, Pomfrey placated. She tapped her quill against the paper, clearly deep in thought. And though Dazai doubted she was going to be able to solve his current problem, he was at least a little curious as to her current line of thought. Beginners at Transfiguration usually make their mistakes with their wand manipulation. Snape grunted. He eyed Dazai's wand hand with some interest. Clearly, that isn't Mr. Dazai's problem. His form is adequate. Yes, she shook her head, frowning thoughtfully. Lack of focus is another major mistake. That's what I was thinking. Before Dazai could interrupt again, petulant, Snape continued. Transfiguration spells are very precise. Even a single wayward thought can prevent complete transformation. Hence why beginners often make the match shiny, but not pointed. Or sharp, but still wooden. Dazai considered that, but... That's not right at all, he said, crossing his arms over his chest. He huffed out a peeved breath. Modus Subtilis was more nitpicky than this. On the desk, the match suddenly rolled as if Dazai's breath had lifted it through sheer irritation alone. Figured his annoyance was more powerful than this shoddy spell. Snape's eyes snapped to the match first, then to Dazai himself. He wore an expression like he was debating whether or not to scold Dazai for arguing. In the end, Snape settled on merely glaring. Dazai turned a glare of his own onto the match, certain he should channel his frustration out onto it, rather than his own lack of talent. It wasn't a lack of talent. Transfiguration was just stupid. Dazai was certain of that much. It had been a while since he'd failed so spectacularly at spellcasting, and Dazai was only left with the conclusion that transfiguration was some kind of, well, Dazai didn't know what, but it clearly worked upon different laws to the rest of magic. If all transfiguration spells had the same magical signature, then there must have been something else. Something Snape wasn't telling him, or maybe didn't know about himself. An hour, a full hour, practicing the world's stupidest spell to absolutely no result. Dazai was starting to feel like a first year again, waving his wand around to no effect, but he knew how magic worked now. Could write a whole book on it if he really wanted to bore himself with the exercise. Something was wrong. Some invisible step to transfiguration that magic alone couldn't act on. In short, transfiguration sucked. Dazai opened his eyes and the curious faces of Snape and Pomfrey stared back at him. Another point for transfiguration being stupid. He couldn't sense out any changes to the magical signature even with his eyes closed. Transfiguration is the worst, he grunted. Dazai slumped back in the chair, expression peeved and fingers sore around his wand from overuse. I want to cast cool spells again. Let's do Incendio. Just as he spoke, a flicker of fire spurted out from Dazai's wand. It shot out towards a stack of papers that Snape deftly swiped off the desk. Black charred the desktop, but otherwise didn't spread the flame. Dazai sighed, dispassioned. Careful, Dazai blew a raspberry. I'm being careful. That was intentional. Snape's jaw snapped shut. Pomfrey hummed, evidently unbothered by Dazai's errant fire magic. She glanced down at her notes, which had been left untouched for several minutes now. I think, she said, we should consult Minerva for the next lesson. I'm sure she'll have some proper input. Snape side-eyed her. My input is plenty proper. And hers will be more so, Pomfrey said. If anyone can discern what is, as Mr. Dazai puts it, missing from his spellcasting, Minerva can... Snape made a sound, presumably thoughtful. But there was a noticeable tension to his face Dazai saw. Almost like Snape wasn't entirely on board with McGonagall's involvement. Odd. Dazai had always thought the two professors were fairly close. His eyes narrowed, assessing, but Snape's face didn't give any more way. As long as you don't invite Lockhart, Dazai said warily. Snape and Pomfrey blinked. Then, Pomfrey snorted. Beside her, Snape looked sick at merely the thought. Seeing this, Dazai joined in Pomfrey's delighted giggles. After a second, Snape finally relented. The corner of his lips twitched upwards vaguely in amusement. He shook his head. Certainly, that man will not be invited. He glanced at the door, as if Lockhart might suddenly barge in without warning. A declaration of the hero has arrived on his lips. He will never be invited. That's the only smart thing you've said all lesson, Snape, Dazai cheerily told him. Snape's good mood was immediately dashed. Remind me why I put up with your insolence again, problem child, he grit out. You barely tolerate me, sir. Snape stared him down for a moment, then gruffly spit. Just barely. I think, Pomfrey said, tearing them from their bantering. Now may be a good time to stop for today. She cast an exasperated glance to Snape and Dazai both. Honestly, how you two managed lessons, just the two of you without supervision, is beyond me. Snape bristled. We manage just fine. We're only sometimes at each other's throats, ma'am. Pomfrey smiled indulgently his way. Then, serious once more, she rested her notes on her lap. As for our next step, she said, if Minerva is available, I would like to invite her to our next lesson, see what she has to say on the subject. Snape nodded, looking his usual stern self at being back on topic. I agree. Although I doubt she'll be able... He paused. Between her classes, her lions, and her other obligations, Minerva will be hard-pressed to find the time. Pomfrey hummed. Perhaps over winter break? she inquired. She'll have more time, we all will, to commit ourselves to getting Mr. Dazai caught up with his peers. She paused, already seriously considering continuing their lessons over break. Snape nodded, also contemplative. Dazai wondered if he should say something. Let's see. If we tell Minerva now, she can have her own lesson plan prepared for break. The only good time for her, I'm afraid. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Ideally, Sunday as well. He looked between them, watching as Snape and Pomfrey ironed out a class schedule. Dazai watched, bewildered, as the entire plan seemed to cement itself around him, and without him. They could probably meet at the same time, maybe for longer hours, or for more days. Minerva's own break schedule would need to be figured out, of course. She was the keystone piece in all of this. She'd need time to learn Dazai's casting style, then figure out what he was doing wrong. Maybe consult a few books on the subject, or find her own half-forgotten spell Dazai could practice on. Then, assuming everyone was amenable, I'm going home for break, Dazai finally cut in. Pomfrey and Snape's conversation ground to a dead halt. The traction of their growing plan skidded and stumbled until all that remained was two stupefied faces and Dazai's own plain interjection. When they just kept staring, Dazai cleared his throat to continue. I already bought a plane ticket and everything, he said. There's no way Mori will let me stay here just to learn one stupid spell. If it's such a big deal, just recommend me a book and I'll read it over the holiday. Snape's brows furrowed. Suddenly his entire mien filled with tension. There was an odd emotion in his eyes. One Dazai recognized from when Snape decided to poke around too much. It immediately had Dazai on edge. He needed to shut that down fast. Lucky for Dazai, he had the perfect distraction all lined up and ready to go. You're going home. I'm sure I can figure the spell out on my own. No need to sound so anxious, Severus. Dazai deflected, smilingly. The name rolled smoothly off his tongue like it belonged there. Sweet like honey and tea. You, what? Snape stop-started. Tension morphed into befuddlement in a split-second twitch of his face. He skipped straight past worried, annoyed, enraged, and right into utterly baffled. What did you just call me? I don't know what you mean, sir. Snape's lips pressed into a thin line. A second later, his entire face bloomed red with blood. Rage. His shoulders shook. Dazai recognized the motion of someone about to snap. Father wore that look during his fits. Dazai was already prepared for the strike this time. He wouldn't be caught off guard by Snape reaching forward like he had in the past. It was different, like this. Laying the trap, then waiting for retaliation. Predictable. Only scary if he wanted it to be. Shoulders stiff as a cemetery stone, and smile just as stabbing. Dazai waited for the inevitable explosion. Snape drew in a breath and then let it out slowly. Detention, he said, carefully biting out the word like it held any kind of weight. For a week. I won't tolerate that level of disrespect. You will call me Professor Snape, and nothing else, brat. Dazai stared. He blinked several times, as if that would clear his vision up, because there was no way Snape was just going to take a deep breath and move on. Or maybe there was? Because Snape only scowled at him from across the desk. Okay. Maybe Dazai should have expected that. Snape was the type of person to bark and spit, but he'd never really lashed out before, had he? Still, that's it. Snape sighed and pinched his brow. 2 weeks detention, then, Dazai shifted in his seat. That's not what I meant. I know it's not, Snape muttered under his breath. Dazai had to strain to hear him. Then, shall I make it 3 weeks, Mr. Dazai? At his side, Pomfrey had gone quiet, and her lips were pursed with displeasure. When she saw Dazai glancing at her, she shook an uncertain smile loose. Let's not make any more trouble now, you two. Snape shot her a look. You two? He echoed, annoyed. Who's the one making trouble here again? Dazai stared between them. His deflection had kind of worked, but in an attempt to avoid Snape's pesky habit of prying into his home life, He'd only come face to face with this new weird passive version of his potions professor. Someone who let things slide and was apparently only easy to manipulate in certain directions. Strange. Snape was predictable up until the point that he wasn't. Dazai didn't know if he should feel interested or threatened, while Pomfrey and Snape were briefly distracted. Dazai quietly gathered his belongings. He wouldn't be able to make a silent escape, but the sooner he moved, the less time he'd have to spend here. All his moving around must have caught their attention, though. You know, no student is required to return home over winter break. Snape froze Dazai in place with a slowly raised hand. Even if their guardian requests it, Dazai made a show of continuing to gather his things, clearly not enthused with Snape's continued questioning. "That sounds like kidnapping," he said. "What?" Pomfrey startled. Snape let out another breath, steadying himself maybe. He wore a particularly serious expression that Dazai had found himself learning to hate more and more as the year went on. Students enrolled at Hogwarts are placed temporarily in the school's care. That contract is only repealed once the second semester ends. Dazai tilted his head. Really? And Mori had still signed him off for this mission? Dazai wouldn't have thought the doctor could handle having his things legally belong to someone else. But Mori had always been someone for risky gambles when the payoff was grand enough. Dazai shouldn't be so surprised on that front. Although, does that make you my guardian right now? He asked. Snape made a face at that, and Pomfrey answered for him. In a sense, yes. Every staff member at Hogwarts is currently your legal guardian. Then I should be able to call you Severus if I want. You know, we're basically family until May. You'll be in detention until May, brat. More time to spend together, Severus. Aren't we a lucky family? You! Abruptly, Pomfrey shot to her feet. Dazai and Snape immediately snapped to attention. What Mr. Snape intends to say is, she began harshly. Only once it became clear they were done fighting did her tone drop into its usual honeyed cadence. She slowly lowered herself back down. It is no one's choice but your own where you spend your break. Why does everyone keep saying that? Dazai mumbled into his chest. Because really, twice in one day? Sure, he was pretty open about disliking Mori, but that was hardly cause for everyone to jump on him about staying on campus. And while sticking it to Mori was always fun, he couldn't just up and abandon this job. Not when it was the Port Mafia's will. And certainly not when there were so many moving parts. First Blaze, now this. Were his emotions really so plainly written across his face? Had he been slipping without noticing, become something that's easy to read? Maybe Mori was right. Maybe Hogwarts was making him soft. Something blistered in Dazai's chest. Despite the feeling, he drew a blank frown over his face. I'm going home for break, Dazai repeated, this time more firmly. No room for argument. There's no choice to consider, Mr. Dazai. I need you to think this through properly, Snape argued. Dazai leveled him with a tired stare. I've given it plenty of thought. You just like making problems where there aren't any. Snape clicked his tongue, clearly irritated, but as always holding back from doing anything about it. Instead, they repeated the same waltzing steps they always danced. Snape sniffed out something he deemed worrisome. Dazai told him to mind his own business. Snape lied. Dazai lied. Then they revolved around to bickering again. After a second, Snape's hand fell to the drawer of his desk, grabbing the tea undoubtedly. It was his favorite thing to reach for before starting a bothersome conversation. Dazai waited for the telltale clink of his mugs on the desk, a complaint about honey already prepped on his tongue. Though a warm cup did sound nice right now, and it was always nice to give his hands something to distract themselves with. Snape set a charred sheet of paper on the desk. Dazai blinked. Huh? What's this? The question slipped out before he could stall his curiosity. He leaned forward in his seat, annoyances momentarily forgotten upon being caught so off guard. No tea kettle in sight. No familiar snakeskin mug chasing after it. The folded piece of paper. Wasn't magic, Dazai could tell. But something about it still struck him as odd. It churned in his guts, a realization yet unrealized. The fold of the paper was brochure style, divided into 3. The paper would have looked expensive if it weren't for how it had clearly been burnt to bits. Dazai couldn't see anything written on it from his seat, but that didn't mean it was blank. For Snape to be showing it like this, it must have said something interesting. Interesting and relevant. These observations ran through Dazai's mind in an instant, such that by the time Snape even opened his mouth to answer Dazai's questions, the mafioso had already realized the paper's origins. The feeling bubbling in his stomach was undoubtedly something like dread. "Explain this to me," Snape said, tapping a finger against the letter. "If you can do that, I'll permit you to return home." Dazai stared. Pomfrey did the same, expression surprised. Maybe more than Dazai's own, which he had shuttered closed into something empty once again. She recognized the letter, but hadn't expected Snape to mention it then. Dazai looked between them, hoping to find some weakness there worth exploiting. "Let me read it first," Dazai said slowly. Snape looked ready to argue again. "I can hardly tell you which letter that is without at least skimming it first." Snape's expression darkened, as if Dazai's request had decided something foul for him. "You recognize it, then?" "I recognize Mori's fancy paper," Snape grunted. Then he pushed the letter across the desk. Dazai took it without a word, unfolding the trifold to skim its contents. There wasn't much. Most of the letter had been burnt away, likely a remnant from Egg's early exploits. Probably Snape had plucked it out of some pile of ash somewhere. Lucky for Dazai, the letter wasn't particularly damning. A few lines of Mori being his typical annoying self was really all. No reference to the Philosopher's Stone, nor any mention of the Port Mafia and its ongoing scheme. Nothing critical had been leaked, but the tight band of pressure around his chest constricted all the same. "After all I've given you, it would be such a bother for you to fail me now," Mori had written. Dazai remembered it without having to read it again, but he let his eyes bathe in the curving black ink anyway. "You won't be returning home if you don't do this, understand? Not in one piece at least, and that wouldn't be cute at all." Finished reading, Dazai took a silent moment to look up at Snape and Pomfrey. They both appeared as serious as ever. For once, even Pomfrey's everlasting warmth was replaced with a severe frown and tense shoulders. They were looking at one another. Evidently, they were having some kind of silent communication. Whatever it was, they lacked the same finesse Fred and George had. A second later, Pomfrey turned back to her notes and silently reopened them. Dazai glanced back to the letter. Had he really just left this lying around for anyone to take? He was beyond lucky all the important bits had burnt away. It was sloppy, leaving this behind. Dazai didn't do sloppy. He was all clean, efficient work and careful pre-planning. He wasn't a heart-on-his-sleeve, evidence-leaving fool. What was it Mori said at the start of the semester? "I'm not acting like a mafioso." Dazai set the letter on his lap. His eyes fell to the swooping M underlining the page. Then he pinched the skin of his wrist until it turned cherry red. It burned. Mr. Dazai, right. Everyone here was annoying about that particular habit. Dazai silently redirected his hand to the front pocket of his cloak. He withdrew the sickle he'd stashed there earlier. Then, with nimble fingers, he danced it across his knuckles. The coin flipped onto the back of his hand, then into his open palm. A flash of Dazai's fingers had the coin vanish from view. 1 second and a flick of his wrist later, the coin was in his palm again. Repeat. Snape and Pomfrey followed the ostentatious coin tricks with wide eyes. Based on their expressions, Dazai wasn't sure they were really following the sleight of hand. Quick fingers made for confusing work. Dazai liked it that way. Brows pinched, it took Snape nearly a minute before he seemed to realize Dazai was only keeping his hands busy, and not attempting some kind of bribe. He cleared his throat. "This letter," he said, "it was written by Mori?" "Yep," Dazai said, popping the P loudly. Snape's lip twitched. "And yet, he makes reference to someone else being your father." Dazai rested his head to one side. "I'm adopted, Snape hummed, as though he'd already suspected something along those lines. He was still too calm, starting with the easy questions and working up then. Dazai tossed the coin. It spun several times before catching in his open hand. He's annoying about it. And so is my father. He didn't have to fake the irritation in his voice. The whole situation with Mori treating father's waning health was a cluster. Dazai was unfortunately stuck smack in the middle of it. In truth, he didn't like either of them. Dazai would rather be left well alone. Next, we have quite a few concerns, dear, Pomfrey gentled. How about you explain everything to us, and we'll work from there? Sitting upright, Dazai considered her request. Aren't you going to at least make tea first? He asked Snape. Explain the letter. Right. Dazai puffed. Snape was really insistent today, There's not much to say. Dazai snapped his fingers, and the coin jumped into his other hand. Mori was being annoying, as always. Snap. We wrote back and forth all last year, but he never managed to write a letter that wasn't completely insufferable. Snap, you've met him. Snape shifted at that, an odd expression on his face. Briefly, he said, You're fath. Guardian's behavior wasn't exactly my main priority back then. I seem to recall a cheeky brat taking up all my attention at the time. You're a teacher. Shouldn't you be better at multitasking? Pomfrey cleared her throat pointedly. Whatever. You didn't miss much, other than Mori being his usual slimy self. If I had the luxury of ignoring him too, I would, Dazai said, sounding almost wistful. Slimy, Pomfrey mouthed. Mr. Dazai, can you explain that? Of, relating to, or resembling slime. Pomfrey's brows pinched in confusion, but beside her, Snape merely sighed. Don't just echo the dictionary at us, problem child, he breathed. Explanations, examples. Here. Snape poked a finger down on the letter, stabbing out a particularly sentence like it had wronged him. What does this mean? Dazai leaned forward to read it. Mori had written him. It's a bit too large for Elise, but that's what I have you for. You always have looked adorable in white. You're not pure like that at all. Exactly what it sounds like, Dazai grumbled. Even just reading over it now, Dazai could feel the drag on soft fabrics over his skin, white lace and frilly hems, a collared neck, and a petticoat. Dazai didn't actually mind wearing more feminine clothes. He just didn't like when it was Mori doing the dressing. Really, Mori had soured the whole thing for him. The dress was too big for Elise, so he wanted me to wear it. The dress. Snape trailed off, seemingly unsure of what to make of that. He glanced to Pomfrey, whose expression was oddly serious. Don't get weird about that part, Dazai sniffed. I'll wear whatever I like. That's not what I... Snape stopped himself. He drew in a labored breath. Sorry, making you wear this dress is one of those slimy things Mori does? Pomfrey asked. Her voice was careful, like it was treading a thin edge, like she was talking to a child. Dazai didn't like that one bit. When people talked slow and intentional like that, it meant they had something they wanted to say, something they weren't sure how to say. And he wasn't a child. Not really. Now it was Dazai's turn to make a face. He just goes shopping with Elise too much, he said, just as careful as Pomfrey had. I don't mind. He did. But that was beside the point. Pomfrey smiled indulgently, but also somewhat guiltily. Clearly, she didn't really believe he was. Unbothered. Though Dazai wasn't clear, exactly, on what she was so hung up on. Sure, Mori was a creep. But that was old news. That last comment. Pomfrey gently prodded. About purity? Dazai asked. He tasted the word around his tongue like he'd eaten one of Fred's joke candies. The ones that burst into garbage flavors rather than cherry or honey or whatever else was actually printed on the box. Pomfrey and Snape nodded. You could ask anyone about that, Dazai told them. They shared a look. Explain. Dazai flicked the coin. When he caught it, he covered it with his other hand. He made a mental guess at what it had landed on. Tails. Then uncovered it. Tails. Well, Everyone here thinks I'm evil, right? I'm the so-called demon student. Pomfrey's look of blistering guilt doubled, and Snape pursed his lips tightly in response. Dazai tossed the coin again. This time as he covered it, he gestured for Snape to call it. When his professor didn't bite, Dazai sighed and peeked at it himself. Tails again. Mori was only expressing a similar thought. A demon shouldn't wear white, something like that. Dazai paused. He says I look better in black, you know. Lucky the school uniform is so dark, It suits my figure better. They stared at him, evidently at a loss for words. Snape shook himself. Your own guardian thinks that about you? There was something odd in his voice. Trepidation? Whatever the emotion, it had Dazai fumbling his next coin flip. He hastened to catch it. A failed toss. Dazai took an eager stab in the dark and called the toss as having landed heads. A quick glance revealed his guess to be right, and he sighed. But this letter is from before Quirrell's. Snape trailed off, a flash of guilt suddenly in his eyes. At once he straightened. This isn't a new development. Course not, Dazai said, flapping his hand around disinterestedly. He paused then. How exactly should he explain that to Mori? Being evil wasn't necessarily a bad thing. In the Port Mafia, someone without morals was flexible, wasn't constrained by anything except, apparently, that they wouldn't look good in white. Eventually, he settled on a dry, call it an inside joke. He wasn't laughing, though, and neither were Pomfrey and Snape, who now both looked about seconds from being sick. Dazai wasn't sure why. Still, he got the feeling he must have misstepped somehow, or otherwise, that those two were on a completely different page than he was. Drat. The differences between Port Mafia life and Hogwarts life were, once again, a startling pain to reconcile. Conversations of this nature were always easier in the Port Mafia, where he thinks I'm evil was more of a brag than anything else. Where having the boss's doctor's full attention was only a bad thing if Dazai let it be one. Mori just knows me, he said after a second. How I am. Snape made a face like he wanted to disagree. And when he says, here, Pomfrey indicated the letter, that you wouldn't be returning home in one piece. If you failed. She leaned away from the page. Could you please explain that? Please, there's no judgment of you here. Fail my classes and be punished, Dazai lied. That's all. At the word punished, Pomfrey and Snape sat at full attention. If Dazai had thought they'd been on edge before, he was instantly proven wrong twice over. Snape's stare was intense. Pomfrey's only mildly less so. What kind of punishment? Snape spoke, and it was not a question when he said it like that. Dazai racked his brains. Because in this context, Mori had most certainly meant I'll drop you on my surgical table, have a go, and I'll decide what to do with you from there. That was not the answer Snape and Pomfrey wanted. Or maybe it was. But not in any way Dazai thought he might benefit from. In any case, Dazai decided it was best to soften his answer. Something a bit less vivisection in nature, and a bit more pedestrian. Something Draco's father might do. Or Ron's. Or Hermione's. Until, abruptly, Dazai realized he didn't know. He'd beat the shit out of me was the first thing Dazai thought of. But thinking back, the most punishment Hogwarts had ever doled out was making him listen to Lockhart talk for an hour straight. So maybe a beating was too harsh? But that couldn't possibly be right. Detention then, or, the homebound equivalent, grounding. That was it. That was the safest answer. To successfully navigate this situation, he'd avoid any talk of violence whatsoever. The last thing Dazai needed was Snape connecting random dots between violence and Yokohama, and then, inevitably, the Mafia. Mr. Dazai? Pomfrey asked, gentle and slow. You can tell us. No harm will come to you. I promise. Dazai frowned. He'd taken too long to answer, and the abnormal silence must have made him look scared. He was scared, kind of. Scared that he'd been slipping as a mafioso. That the correct answer hadn't immediately popped to mind. That Mori was right about him. My mind wandered off. Dazai apologized, sheepish. Pomfrey's returning smile was sad. That's all right, dear. Do you need a minute, or... He shook his head. No. It's a figure of speech, not in one piece. He just means I'll regret it. Snape gestured for him to continue. His hands were pressed flat against the table, but every so often a minute tremor ran through them. Dazai flipped his coin, fingers precise. Heads, just as he'd thought. The next one would be tails, he decided. I didn't fail my classes, though, Dazai told them. The headmaster let me pass, remember? I didn't get punished for that. Tails. The next one would be tails again. Dazai pretended to misjudge the toss and caught it in his left hand rather than his right. But Mori has punished you. For other things? Tails, Dazai muttered to himself upon spotting the coin. He tossed it again. Sure, speaking out of turn, stealing things from his office, screwing around while he's trying to patch me up. Things like that. Pomfrey's eyes narrowed. Patch you up? She asked. Mori's a doctor, Dazai explained. Though really, at least Snape already knew that much. Dazai called the next tosses heads. Last time he was cleaning up a dog bite, I kicked him in the stomach. He indicated the spot on his arm where a feisty retriever had sunk its teeth in. He grounded me to the kennel. I guess I was supposed to learn a lesson, but I didn't really learn anything except that dogs are gross. The coin landed heads. Snape and Pomfrey stared, and the next flip would land the coin tails. The truth was that Dazai was simply gifted with the feel of a coin in his palm, the weight of it, the rays on each side, the spiny ridges along its edge like a dead thing's rib cage. There was nothing random about how Dazai flipped a coin. It was too familiar to mistake, and when Dazai tossed it, how he flicked his thumb, how many times it spun. He already knew how it would land. The tail's face was ever so slightly heavier on this particular coin, so if he flicked it just like this, it would always land on tails. Flip it like that, and it would be heads. Dazai made a game of it, of rigging the coin to land tails end up, then trying to convince himself it had landed heads instead. But it always revealed exactly how he'd told it to, and never flipped itself around without his knowing. Even when he pretended to flub it, Dazai's hands wouldn't fail him. There was no such thing as chance in Dazai's hands. The only splinter of fun this game offered was when he really did drop the coin. Kennel, Snape echoed, something horrified bleeding into his words. Dazai's brows pinched, certain he hadn't misstepped, but still seeing that look on Snape's face as though he had. Dogs, Dazai said simply. Ugly, smelly things. Bite if you look at them too long, wag their stupid tails if you smile their way. Snape's lips twitched, but his annoyance was muted beneath something else. Something boiling, Dazai thought. I know what a dog is, Mr. Dazai. Then why ask such a stupid question? Snape gaped, at a loss for words. Dazai glanced to Pomfrey and found her similarly frozen, hands stalled over her notes. He tossed the coin heads, and it landed just that a second later. And Mori. Snape trailed away. Often, I'm very well. Behaved, Dazai said by way of answer. They didn't look convinced, but not in the usual way that had Dazai hiding a cheeky smile. More like they had learned something unsavory, like they were about to throw up. It was odd, but mostly annoying, because Dazai had hedged his responses in such a way to avoid that kind of reaction. Though, he supposed, no one was jumping across the table to grab at him, so this could have gone much worse. Is that all? Dazai asked. He didn't wait for answer, deciding in that second both that yes, they were done, and also that his next coin flip would land tails. I'll check a book out on transfiguration for overbreak, and when I come back, McGonagall can tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. Dazai stood then. He ignored their protests, muted as they were, and showed himself out of Snape's office. People were such a hassle, he thought, always trying to make mountains out of molehills. But for all his exasperation, Dazai's stomach was tied up in sick-feeling knots. His hand was steady, his control of the coin exact as always. But he'd left that letter behind when he should have left a gaping hole in his wake. Something had changed about him, hadn't it? Something sentimental and careless. Mori's words echoed in his head. Dazai flipped the sickle tails, but tucked it in his pocket without checking. Later that night, alone in the office, Dazai finally pulled Ginny's diary back out. It seemed to glow in the harsh moonlight. The shatter of light filtered through stained glass made the book look like it had been ripped apart in a fit of rage. He turned open the cover. The greeting he'd written that afternoon was gone now. The page was blank in its wake. It was like he'd never put a quill to it in the first place, except for the bottom of the page. What was once empty was now stained with ink darker than the darkest of shadows. It still looked wet, like it was only just written, but a touch revealed it to be dry. No quill had written this. The words were as much a part of the diary as the broken spine was, a reply. The diary had responded. It was charmed, or it was alive. Egg made an asking sound from Dazai's shoulder. Printed in curling black script, the diary had written back, "I would hardly call this a home." Chapter 18. A Dragon, a Delinquent, and a Diary. My name is Tom Riddle. May I ask who you are? Tell me, how did you come in contact with this diary? I got you from a friend. That's lovely. And your name would be? Dazai breathed into his scarf. A plume of white air clouded up around his face, warm where it left his lungs and freezing once it touched the air. He cupped his hands together and scowled into them. You look deep in thought. Dazai glanced away from the Hogwarts train. Snow was starting to gather on top. Blaze was watching him from a few feet off, Draco standing stiff as ice at his other side. Should I be concerned? Dazai puffed out another cloud. It's cold, he grumbled. It is December. Draco clipped in. He had his hands shoved into his pockets, and a shivering tremor shook his entire body. He was also standing about a foot too far from the rest of their group to really be a part of their group, trying to look separate from them while still holding a conversation. Dazai strained to hear him. Still, they can start boarding already, can't they? We've been waiting for at least 5 minutes already. People don't make me wait for them. It's been less than a minute, Blaze said. I guess Draco is the impatient type. Though if we aren't allowed on soon, I'll just freeze to death. That's not an awful way to go, right? Hermione elbowed him, and Dazai staggered to the side in a few stumbling steps. Don't joke about that. They're boarding now. Hermione and Dazai jolted to attention. Sure enough, the train doors were now open. The other students, who had before given Dazai's group a wide berth, were now quickly hurrying inside. It was cold enough to freeze out here. Dazai would be sprinting in a step behind them if he thought he could do as much without starting a stampede of some kind. The screaming would just hurt his ears. Beside that, he was carrying precious cargo. Dazai fixed the heavy bag slung over his shoulder. It squirmed. Let's head in, Draco said, though most of the crowd had yet to clear. I'll get us a compartment. Lead the way then, Mr. Respected Leader of Slytherin. Draco shot him a questioning glance over his shoulder before leading them up the step and into the train. As expected, people parted nervously around them. Whether from respect for Draco or fear of Dazai was anyone's guess. Everyone slumped with relief the second they were on board. Warmth oozed around them, melting their frozen bones and drying their running noses. Dazai let out a breath of satisfaction, and wasn't met with any responding plume of white air. This way, Draco said, tearing the group from their collective reverie. I want to chase those Hufflepuffs out before they get settled in. Dazai followed Draco's gaze to the compartment next over, where 2 Hufflepuff first years were sliding their suitcases beneath the seats. They were smiling and giggling with one another. Evidently, they hadn't noticed the oncoming Malfoy storm currently thundering their way. Draco stomped up to the door. He crossed his arms over his chest, and when they finally looked at him, he snapped, Out! Out! The Hufflepuffs squeaked and hastily began to regather their things. They were rushing out the door within the next few seconds. Dazai smiled politely at them as they left, and they practically sprinted down the corridor. Draco took a seat by the door. Sit, he told them, before someone realizes you're with me. Hermione hovered awkwardly at the door for a second before complying. She took the seat across from Draco. "You don't have to order us, Draco," Dazai said, amused, and took the seat beside Hermione. Blaise sat a second later. Without further affair, Draco shut the door. "It's the only way I can be sure you'll listen," Dazai pouted. "That's not true at all." "You're right. You never listen, no matter what tone of voice I use." "Well, that's what I thought." They stared at each other for a second. Then Draco snorted out a laugh. Dazai grinned. Then, without further ado, Dazai plopped his bag onto his lap. It wasn't his bag, rather, it was Luna's. Her two large bags seemed to stretch to impossible lengths, and was exactly what Dazai needed for today's exploits. Luna had given it to him without any fuss. Evidently, Luna was more than pleased to help an exorcist in need, and Dazai was too grateful for the generosity to correct her. The bag shook and wiggled. A small plume of smoke curled out from where the flap was a little undone. "Hey, Hermione, do you know any spells to lock that door?" "Of course I do," she preened, and cast it in the same breath. The door clicked shut, but just as soon as her satisfaction with the spell came, it was gone. She whirled a disapproving glare onto Dazai. "I can't believe you're actually smuggling her out of Hogwarts." "We're going to get caught. I'll get a suspension." Dazai unzipped the bag. A second later, the spiny black head of a dragon poked out. "For what, sitting near Egg? She needs some space to grow." "Anyway, Draco did the same thing last year." "Don't drag me into this," Draco objected. "Not again." Egg popped out of the bag, eyes eagerly hunting around the new environment. She scrabbled excitedly against the bag. Then, with a great flap, shot into the sky. The compartment was too small for her to really get going, but she made a good show of circling over their heads. Dazai watched her for a moment before turning his focus to the window. The ground was covered in snow now. A thin layer of white flakes. It would at least a foot deep by the end of the day. Dazai wasn't exactly eager to go home per se, but he had to admit he was glad to be avoiding all the snowed-in days this year. He'd gotten a cold last time. This winter break, he could probably scrape by with only a few cuts and bruises. Less if he did a good job shutting up and staying out of Father's way. The train kicked to life below them. It rumbled warmly underfoot, and was shortly chugging away from the station. Dazai watched as, slowly, Hogwarts and its surrounding forests became a tiny spire in the distance. He kept staring long after it was gone. "Dazai?" Dazai blinked. Blaise was watching him. Actually, they all were. "What is it?" "You're zoning out," Blaise told him, jaw square and gnawing in thought. "We were just talking about our plans over break. Hermione asked what you were going to be doing." Dazai sniffed. "Oh, lying in bed, pestering Mori, doing some reading for class." Hermione perked up. "I thought you'd read all the books?" she asked. Then she let out an elated gasp. "Don't tell me. You're really going to start doing your homework?" "Dazai." "What? Of course not." "Hermione, don't be silly." Hermione sputtered, face going red with either embarrassment or anger. Dazai laughed at the expression. He turned to Draco, who was watching them with thinned eyes. "If only I could crash Draco's stuffy party instead. Blaise will be there too, right?" "Sure," Blaise said, gesturing lazily with one hand. A second later, Egg tried to snap at it. Blaise dropped his hand quickly after that. "I don't think you'd like it much, though. Malfoy parties are crowded and loud." Draco nodded stiffly, like he didn't want to be seen agreeing with that sentiment, but also couldn't bring himself to disagree with it. Blaise continued. "The real fun is after we sneak away." Draco jerked in his direction. "Don't say that so loud. It's not exactly a secret that the Slytherin kids always disappear halfway through every Malfoy party, Draco. Still, you don't have to make it sound like I'm just dying to escape social niceties. It's a socialite's duty, to commune with the people, even if it is terribly tedious." Blaise shrugged, clearly nonplussed. Dazai leaned forward on his elbows. "So Draco is a bad boy after all, Running away from your own parties to hang out with friends. Draco flushed head to toe. Dazai. What? Dazai flapped a hand. Unlike with Blaze, Egg wouldn't dare to bite at him. Don't scold me for your own delinquent behavior. Don't call me a bad boy, he hissed, voice warbling and frantic with embarrassment. It's demeaning, for a Malfoy. It's true, though, you're Slytherin's resident bad boy. That's you! Dazai leaned forward, trapping his chin between his palms. He smiled churlishly. There's no need to protest so loud, Draco. You're choosing to sit with us instead of someone like Pansy. That makes you a bad boy for sure. Draco gawped. His face was an impressive shade of red. That's not. Blaze, back me up. I'm glad you're sitting with us, Blaze said. That only made Draco more flustered. He gaped between them for a desperate moment, before plastering a scowl across his face. He crossed his arms, or tried to. Before he could complete the I'm totally fed up with you lot look, Egg crash-landed into his chest. Draco had to scramble to catch her. Egg made a chirping noise. Dazai laughed. A second later, Hermione giggled as well. Hermione turned a fond smile onto him then. You seem in high spirits, she commented. Dazai blinked. Huh? Do I? I think so, she said. Lately, with everything going on. I've been worried about you. More than usual, I mean. Blaze and Draco shared a glance. Fred and George say you've been more distant lately. And I can't help but worry, with everyone picking on you. I don't mind, Dazai said, interjecting before Hermione could pick up too much steam. All the attention. If anything, it's keeping me busy. Hermione made a face like she didn't believe him. Which was fair, really, because Dazai didn't exactly hide his dislike of crowds, but the whole Daily Prophet situation had really forced his hand. As things stood, Dazai was choosing to pick his battles. So what if everyone at Hogwarts hated his guts? Lucius's test was complete. So there. At the very least, Mori would be pleased with him. Dazai shifted upright. Anyway, I spend practically all day in the office. How are the twins possibly feeling neglected? Hermione's mouth snapped shut at that, a sheepish expression crossing her face. Dazai nodded in mute agreement. I never know what those two are thinking either. Those two can be real enigmas when they want to be. I think it has something to do with their twin telepathy. Draco sputtered. Their what? Anyway, Dazai said. Hermione, I'm supposed to figure out transfiguration over break, Snape said. And if I can't figure it before January, I'll really just die. Do you have any tips? Immediately, she perked up. And before anyone could get a word in edgewise, Hermione barreled into an incredibly long and terribly well-thought-out lecture about the basics of transfiguration. Dazai knew most of it already, though a few notes were new to him. She was wide and gesturing. In a quick wave, she swiped a textbook from her bag and flipped it open to a diagram. She showed him a complicated-looking matrix, told him about chemical reactions that Dazai knew had nothing to do with actually casting a spell, drew a shape in the air, and flicked her wand, and pretended to turn Draco's head into a weasel's. Transfiguration was still stupid. Hermione made it a little bearable. Ice had frosted over the window, and it was cold even here. Dazai squeezed into his coat to hide from the chill. And that's why you flick your wand before swishing it when transfiguring buttons. Dazai stared. That's awfully nitpicky. At some point during the lecture, Blaze had drifted off to sleep. Of course it is. Transfiguration is especially complex. A swish instead of a flick could set your button on fire. Just use Incendio for that. Dazai. I'm kidding. Dazai pursed his lips. I'll just give up on transfiguration. This sounds like too much. What's the point of it anyway? Who wants to turn a button into a beetle? Hermione's cheeks puffed out. It's beetle into button. And that's a basic spell. For practicing the essentials before moving on to higher level. Like what? Match to needle. Just buy needles at the store instead of matches. Honestly. What? Merlin, you two can bicker. Hermione and Dazai immediately ceased their chattering. Draco was watching them with dull eyes. I'm starting to think that's Dazai's real power, starting fights. It's Being annoying, actually, Dazai grinned, cheeky. Draco rolled his eyes. He pet along the ridge of Egg's back, who preened happily at the attention. I'll believe that, he said. Anyway, surely you figured out transfiguration after that lecture. It's been hours. Dazai made a so-so gesture with his hand, and Hermione made a noise of displeasure at his side. It's not like that, he said to Hermione's pout. Transfiguration is just different, he shrugged. Somehow, I don't know. Hermione made a face. Really? I wouldn't think so. Dazai wouldn't have either. Yet here they were. Maybe some more research would prove useful. He did promise Snape he'd read up on transfiguration over break. And he would. Unfortunately, practicing spells off campus was forbidden. Regardless, bang! Dazai jumped. Draco and Hermione did the same, and Blaise startled out of his nap with a squeak. Dazai glanced around the room. Was that the door? Draco put a calming hand on Egg, but the dragon wasn't mollified in the slightest. She growled and stood. Someone is trying to get in? Probably just the lady selling candies. Or, Dazai said, squinting at the door. Mercifully, it was still locked from Hermione's spell. Someone else. The door rattled again. Someone was clearly trying to get in, angrily trying to get in, if the forceful shoving and yanking was anything to go by. Meanwhile, Egg was growing more and more distressed by the second. Draco's hand stilled her, for the most part, but a startled dragon was still a dragon. And by the fifth bang of the door, she had shot into the air again and was anxiously circling around. Any ideas? Oh, Blaise turned to him. Oh, what's that? Dazai grimaced. The feeling of magic pricked against his skin. It's as someone just cast a spell on the door. Oh, an unlocking charm. Hermione and Draco realized at the same time, which was all well and good, except for... 3 things happened in very quick succession. First, Pansy swung the door open with enough force that Dazai briefly thought a gun had shot off somewhere. Second, Egg blasted out the door. Third, Pansy screamed. Dazai launched to his feet at once. The others were only half a second behind. What the devil was that? Pansy screeched, hands flying protectively covering her head. Was that a blasted dragon? It was a bat, Dazai yelled. It was a fire salamander, Blaise said. Pansy stared at them, appalled. You're insane! She jerked around to find the massive black blur that had just bolted past her. But Egg was gone, long gone, shot off into the far corners of the Hogwarts train, and only findable now by the... Someone several compartments down screamed. By the sound of horrified children. Right, fantastic. His dragon was loose, again. And somehow, that still wasn't Dazai's biggest problem, because Pansy was now glaring daggers into him like she might actually kill him with a stare alone. What are you doing? She asked. What have you all gotten Draco involved with now? Draco balked. What? Don't just say my name so loud. You, get in here. Draco hooked Pansy's cloak with one hand and dragged her inside the compartment. She yelped. It was immediately a very tight squeeze. Hermione stumbled back into Dazai, who then fell against the window. It was freezing against his back. He jerked away from it and stepped on Blaise's toes. I don't need anyone seeing me sitting with this lot, Draco whispered harshly. Pansy tore herself free from Draco. But she didn't argue, so she must have seen some value in what Draco said, regardless. When she looked around the compartment to see not only Dazai but also Hermione, she paled like she was going to be sick. Might be too late for that, Draco. Draco balked. What? Why? Dazai lifted his chin towards the door. Standing just outside the entryway, a rattled-looking Millie and Tracy were watching their interaction with wide eyes. Get them in here too, then. There's no room, Draco. Are you trying to crush us to death? That's too painful. You all are, hey, watch the elbow. Watch it. Ouch. Hey. Then, twee. Everyone jumped to cover their ears, as a pitchy whistle suddenly tore through the air. Dazai winced away from Hermione and into Blaise's chest. Blaise wrapped 2 steadying arms around his waist. Ow, Pansy groaned. She whirled on Hermione. What in Merlin's name are you doing? The screeching whistle still echoed in their compartment. Hermione Hermione held her fingers to her mouth like she might just whistle again, if everyone didn't start behaving immediately. Dazai smiled placatingly, though he was sure this whole racket would be more easily solved if Pansy just walked away. She didn't. Tracy and Millie shuffled at the door. They looked somehow both horrified, bewildered, and devastatingly angry at once. It didn't make for a pretty picture. Dazai wondered if he could at least kick them out, if not Pansy. Hermione dropped her hand from her mouth. She leveled Pansy with a stubborn frown. "Shutting the lot of you up," she puffed angrily. She started to put her hands on her hips, nailed Draco in the side with an elbow, then dropped them back to her side ineffectually. Sorry, Draco." He shot her a glare. "What part of don't say my name?" "Well, why not? We're all friends, aren't we?" Hermione huffed. "Draco is not friends with this demon," Pansy countered immediately. Dazai raised his hands innocently as if to say, "Who, me?" He was staying out of this, and it was perhaps Dazai's first instance of self-restraint he'd used in a long time because meddling and teasing usually came so eagerly to him. Dazai's go-to method with Pansy was making her angry, but she already was angry, and he had more important things to do right now than getting punched in the face again. His jaw twinged at the memory. "And I won't have anyone thinking he is—" Pansy whirled on Draco. "Come on, Draco, you'll sit with me. It's better company. And the Malfoy name could benefit from some of that." "He can sit with whoever he wants," Hermione countered, apparently deciding this was the hill she was going to die on. "Then, and he's sitting with his real friends. He's sitting with a mudblood, a demon, and poor manipulated Blaise. Draco clearly doesn't know what he wants." Draco gaped, and Hermione let out an offended squeak. "Pansy," Draco said slowly, warning. "We've talked about this." Dazai raised a brow at that, asking, but Pansy seemed to know exactly which conversation Draco was referring to. She cast him a severe-looking glance. Then, with a voice like she was damned to something, she told Draco, "Your father is going to be there, at the station, to pick you up." Draco balked. Hermione shot him an asking look. "My mother told me she's planning to bother him over some favor when we arrive," Pansy continued. She leaned in close enough for Dazai to feel her breath. It was cold and shaking. She whispered, "You can sit with whoever you want, if that's what makes you happy, Draco. But I can't let you walk out of here with him where your father can see." Draco stared. Dazai stared as well. Who knew Pansy had a heart? I did, Dazai thought bitterly. The word jealous was not an unfamiliar one for their interactions. Pansy had a heart that only beat for Draco and Blaise, and pumped righteous anger at everyone else. "He's picking me up himself?" Draco asked, apparently still processing. "I thought he'd send a servant. Does it matter? I've been looking for you for the last hour." "Come sit with me," Hermione cut in. "You can't just drag him around wherever you please." "Does it look like I was talking to you, Mudblood?" "Excuse me." Blaise cleared his throat. Dazai, basically wrapped up in Blaise's hug, had to twist his neck around to see his friend's face. Blaise was watching the proceedings with the same expression an adult might give a toddler struggling to fit together a four-piece puzzle. Like the solution was so elementary to him, he could barely understand what the use of this conversation even was. "I think," he said slowly, disparagingly, "you're all forgetting something rather important." Everyone stared at him. Pansy's brow twitched in blatant annoyance. "There's a firebat salamander." Dazai wriggled in Blaise's arms. Suspicious creature on the loose, Blaise barely glanced down at him. "We should catch it." Instantly, Hermione and Draco sobered up. Pansy, however, did not. "That is not a real creature," she glowered. "What was it?" Tracy asked suddenly. "Why was it in here?" Millicent asked a second later. Not that we want answers from the likes of you." Pansy turned on her posse, snarling. "We do want answers from them. We want answers, so we can turn them in for whatever is it they're dragging my Draco into." "Your Draco?" Dazai echoed snottily. "Well, he's not yours." "Says who?" "Oi, that's enough, you two. Honestly." Hermione poked a finger into Pansy's chest, who responded with an affronted gasp. "I understand you don't like Dazai, but that has nothing to do with how Draco feels about him." If you care about him so much, you should support his decisions. Draco bristled. I can fight my own battles, Hermione. Pansy looked between them. Her rage was beginning to look a little bewildered now. Dazai didn't think she'd ever been told off before, let alone by a Gryffindor Muggleborn. And, really, Hermione continued, evidently on a roll now, if you're going to hate Dazai, at least do it for a good reason, like how he doesn't do his homework despite being incredibly smart, or how he sneaks around past curfew in clear violation of several school rules, or... Let's all try to stay focused, Dazai cut in. Hermione's mouth snapped shut. A dusting of pink bloomed over her cheeks. There's a monster, he continued. I vote we hunt it down, while Pansy and Draco here chat about their feelings. There's nothing to talk about, Draco grumbled. At the same time, Pansy scoffed. As if I'd take orders from you. Dazai made a show of sighing. Blaise gave him a maybe reassuring pat. Pansy, he breathed. I don't need people seeing Draco and I together any more than you do. I'm giving both of us an out here. She started at that, like she was surprised he'd given any thought to the Malfoys situation. But her stun was short-lived, and not a second later Pansy was scowling once more. Blaise, keep an eye on them. Hermione and I will investigate the monster. Pansy gawped. Wha? You aren't leaving, I'm chasing you out. Millie and Tracy shared a look. If that makes you feel better, Dazai said, much to Pansy's spitting anger. He wiggled. Blaise, be careful. Blaise released Dazai from his hold. Then, quietly into Dazai's ear, he asked, Second time's a charm? I'm really starting to wish I hadn't hatched this thing, he muttered back. The warmth of Blaise's hug lingered for only a second longer. And the next second, Dazai was just as cold as when he'd been standing outside. It was a squeeze to force his way out of the cabin. Dazai inched his way clumsily through the tight quarters. Pansy set him off with a shove, while Millie and Tracy flinched away from him like he was poison. Hermione jumped. Oh, Dazai, wait up. Dazai didn't slow his steps, the press of people on all sides uncomfortable in the way Blaise's hug hadn't been, but he did wait for her once he was out the door and into the more open corridor. The hall was a mess. There were papers and candies scattered all across the floor. Someone's robes were torn into a ragged pile against the wall. Something was burning. But for all the mess, the hall was empty. All the compartment doors had been hastily shut, students having likely run into them for cover, where it was safe from the wild, shadowy beast currently haunting Hogwarts for the second time. Someone's head poked out of a nearby compartment. Dazai caught their eye, and they vanished with a squeal. Hermione came up beside him a second later, just as Dazai peered back at her. Pansy slammed the door shut in his face with a snarling mien. It's going to be a really tight fit in there with the door closed. Hermione glanced at him. There was something odd in her expression. Somewhere between peeved and anxious, Dazai thought. That's all you can say? Dazai frowned. We could barely manage with Millicent and Tracy half in the hallway. They're going to suffocate in there for sure. As if in point, he wagged his arms around, showy. No one to butt into, no toes to step on. I mean, Hermione continued, crossing her arms defensively, Pansy Parkinson really hates you. Really, really can't stand you. And unlike everyone else, she isn't afraid to do something about it. Aren't you scared? Or angry? I'm angry, and she's not out for me. Ah. Well, Dazai sniffed. He started walking down the corridor, following the sound of a particularly distressing scream. Hermione followed him with a puffing breath. That's Pansy for you. She made a face when someone screeched several doors down. But it shouldn't be. No one really knows you. But they're all treating you like some kind of monster. Someone shrieked nearby. Dazai and Hermione both jumped. They hastened towards the voice. I said it's fine, didn't I? Dazai asked while they ran. Hermione didn't look at him, too busy watching her step around someone's discarded suitcase. But something about her still seemed distinctly indignant. You should be angry, she said. Everyone hates you for no reason. He puffed, out of breath, a Muggleborn. People hate me for that sometimes, and it drives me insane. A Hufflepuff poked their head out the door, and Dazai had to leap to avoid smacking into them. I'm picking my battles, he told her. Still. And Draco will make whatever decision he thinks is best, Dazai continued, feeling that the words were true. Choosing between Lucius and Dazai, because it did seem to be coming down to that, was no easy trial. Or, more accurately, Draco had to choose between Lucius and himself. Dazai could scarcely relate. His will was the Port Mafia's. Full stop. If he decides he'd rather please his father than hang out with us, Dazai said. That's fine. Hermione made a face, though Dazai was unsure if she was struggling from running or struggling over Draco's conundrum. I don't think that's fine at all, she said, after a gasping moment. Dazai stopped running. Hermione squeaked. She skidded to a stop several feet ahead, then whirled around to face him. What happened? Dazai shook his head. Listen. Hermione paused. It was silent for a second while she listened. The train chugged quietly underneath them and rumbled rhythmically on their feet. I don't hear anything, Hermione said after a few seconds had passed. Dazai snapped. Exactly, he grinned. No screaming. Understanding dawned across Hermione's expression. An infectious smile lit her face a moment later. Egg must have stopped flying around, she realized. Wait, but then how are we going to find her? We were following the sounds of students yelling, but now it's gone quiet. Dazai hummed, thoughtful. Well, he said, the last scream we heard was maybe 10 rooms ahead. He started walking again, more slowly now, towards the area he'd indicated. Hermione followed cautiously. Her eyes skipped across the ceiling first, then along the floor. Dazai found himself doing the same. But there was no sign of Egg to be found. She must have ducked into one of the rooms, or maybe out a window. All the compartments were tightly shut here. Dazai considered the situation. Watch my back. Hermione blinked. Of course, she said. Then, more hesitantly, she added, what for? He made a so-so gesture with his hand, as if to indicate that he wouldn't be explaining any time soon. Hermione gave him a skeptical look, but didn't comment. Decided, Dazai leaned back against the wall. He crossed his arms over his chest and let his eyes fall shut. Dazai, just keep lookout, he told her. I need to focus. Hermione went silent after that, but not without first making a petulant huff. Dazai ignored her. Instead, he narrowed all his focus in the magical sensations around them. At once, the world seemed to blur out of focus. The sounds, the smells, the feel of a rumbling train against his back. Dazai pushed it all away. He searched instead for that tiny something. That little flicker of magic that was always buzzing around in the air. It was always a lot, at first. How the world seemed at once to be screaming with latent magic. But Dazai had been practicing. He'd been keeping his eyes closed through dull charms lectures and pointless transfiguration lessons, and all through the night when he fought for each second of sleep. And soon enough, the awful burn of magic filtered out into something more usable. There was a burst of magic off to his right. Transfiguration, Dazai identified. Kids doing tricks. A flicker of magic 2 compartments down. Aguamenti, not what I'm looking for. Another buzz of magic. Levitation spell. Dazai spread his senses further. This wasn't what he was looking for. He didn't want the telltale snap of a spell taking shape. No, he was looking for something more constant. Dazai felt a bundle of smoky magic wriggle ahead of them. That was what he was searching for. His eyes shot open. Found it. Hermione's face was just inches from his own. Dazai jerked back, smacked into the wall, then brought his hand soothingly to his now bruised skull. Sorry, Hermione squeaked. Sorry, what were you doing? Dazai rubbed at his head, brushing his hair around messily in the process. Looking for Egg, he grumbled. What were you doing? Keeping watch, she said simply. You closed your eyes. I read in the library that cutting off one of your senses can heighten the others. That's what you were doing, right? That's genius, Dazai. He grinned. But stroking his own ego would have to wait until later. They still had a dragon to wrestle after all. Come on. She's just in there. Dazai guided Hermione to the compartment 4 doors down to the left. When they got closer, Dazai saw that the door was partially open. He couldn't hear anyone talking from inside. It must have been empty before Egg flew in. He turned to Hermione, who was similarly squinting at the door. Hermione, you read Draco's dragon book. Any ideas on how to calm down a panicked Norwegian ridgeback? She had her lips pursed. Run away. Dazai raised a brow. No, really. Merlin wrote that unless you already have a bond with the dragon, it's sure to kill you. She's more than welcome to try. Hermione leaned forward to peek into the compartment, then just as quickly pulled herself back from it. She seemed weary, but more than that, thoughtful. Dragons are picky creatures, Dazai, and they're illegal to own for good reason. Merlin said that only when a dragon has bonded to you, something which takes incredible trust, you know, can you be sure it won't turn on you. She won't attack me, Dazai said. He rocked back on his heels. She'd die if she tried. Does she know that? Yup. Hermione blinked at that. Then she shook her head. We aren't killing her. No, Dazai hedged. He turned a considering glance onto Hermione. And she didn't bond with you. During your meetings with Draco and Ron? She didn't. Hermione sighed. She has with Draco, though. Then she raised a hand into the air, like she was cupping some invisible palm of water. When a dragon is bonded to you, they'll put their snout into your palm like this and shut their eyes. It's a sign of trust. I'm in your hands, kind of. Dazai paused. Just like that? Hermione nodded. What, for just anyone? Only for people they trust, or think are really special. She considered for a moment. I guess. There are only so many dragon researchers around today, and none of them are dragon lords like Merlin was. She made a face. If only Draco wasn't stuck in with Pansy right now. Hermione kept talking, oblivious to the question currently worrying a hole in Dazai's head. Because hadn't Egg done that for him? Admittedly, the memory was a bit foggy. Dazai had been half asleep at the time after all. But he was sure of it. Egg had butted into his palm right before they both went to sleep that first night in the gang office. But that couldn't be true, because Dazai really didn't like Egg that much. So Egg couldn't like him in return. It was really that simple. Honest. Dazai just preferred Featherbrain. And yet... The memory of a touch of a dragon's nose on his palm echoed. Dazai double-checked that he was still wearing gloves. Do you think Pansy will make a fuss if we steal Draco for a few minutes? Dazai blinked away from his hands. Hermione tutted. You weren't listening, were you? I was thinking, he admitted shamelessly. She sighed. Well, go on. I know that look. You've thought of something, haven't you? Sure have. Dazai grinned sloppily. Hermione gestured for him to continue. Dazai confidently strode forward to Egg's current hiding place. He grabbed the edge of the door and slid it open just enough to slip through. Then, appeasing, he told her the plan. I'm going to ask, he said, very nicely. Hermione choked. What? Make sure no one comes in here, Dazai said, cheery. Hermione sputtered, and Dazai slammed the door in her face. Then, it was silent. Just a boy and his dragon. Dazai didn't need to use his magical sensitivity this time. Egg was the hulking black shadow pressed underneath the seats. She was breathing heavy, still scared, Dazai supposed. A curling plume of smoke filtered out of her nose and was quickly clogging up the whole compartment. Dazai coughed into his cloak sleeve. All right, you stupid dragon. I know Pansy is awful, but you didn't have to run all the way over here, Egg growled. Dazai paused. Yeesh, you're annoying. With a huff, Dazai lowered himself to the floor. He crossed his legs. Are you moping? If anyone should be moping, it's me. You've never met Mori, but he's the only thing worth moping over today. Down here, Dazai could better make out how Egg's body was curled in on itself. She was still growling, and a fresh cloud of smoke spat out at him. Her claws were sharp as ever, but not bloody. Evidently, her tirade across the train hadn't injured anyone too terribly. Egg's eyes flashed a dangerous shade. Dazai took a deep breath. He gingerly put his hand out, palm up. Egg stared. The smoke spewing from her mouth became a little less thick. But the air was still dense with it, and Dazai's next words were raspy ones. "You're never going to get to relax ever again, if you don't hurry up and come to me," Dazai told her. "I'll get in trouble for keeping you. They'll send me to jail, and they'll take you to some facility somewhere, to get poked and prodded at for the rest of your miserable little life." Well, probably not, actually. Dazai's research on the subject of dragons really indicated Egg would likely wind up in a sanctuary somewhere. She'd spend the rest of her days happily flying around with her kind, open skies above and plentiful fields below. But Egg didn't know that, and Dazai wasn't about to let her in on the truth, unless you want to become someone's experiment. He slowly drew his hand back, rescinding the offer to save Egg from a fate she wasn't really facing. "Shame. And I thought we made quite the duo." Egg shot forward before Dazai even finished his speech. The next second, her nose was pressed so far into Dazai's palm, the force of it knocked his whole body back. "Ugh," Dazai coughed. "Watch it." He looked down at Egg, where she was fit snugly in the palm of his hand. She batted two sad puppy dog eyes up at him. Dazai's lips twitched up into a smile. He patted her on the head, and she chirped. Yeah, good dragon." Egg's teeth bared in a dangerous-looking smile that had Dazai wincing. "All right, that's enough of that." He patted her twice on the back but kept a hand over her wings like she might decide suddenly to fly away again. "We need a plan of action to get you out of here undetected. Lucky us, I always have something up my sleeve," she grumbled. "Glad you asked, Egg. The plan is to ask Hermione for help." Dazai grunted as he stood, ignoring the way Egg whined at him to stay put. He patted her on the nose. He opened the door. "Hermione, I need—" "Oh." Hermione spun around to face him, eyes blown and mouth half open. Gemma and some Hufflepuff brats stared at him. "Hello," Dazai said pleasantly. He slammed the door shut at his back before Egg could even think to poke her head out. It rattled noisily and drew a flinch from Hermione. "Gemma, it's been a while. I'm afraid I don't know your friend." "Cut the crap, Dazai." Gemma narrowed a glare on him. Her eyes flashed to the door, then back. A monster was seen by nearly everyone on board. A monster whose description sounds suspiciously like the one you were involved with last year. Hermione shot him a desperate look. Dazai rocked on the balls of his feet. "If by involved with you mean it attacked me, then sure." Gemma sneered. "I told you," she said. "I told you, if you hurt even one student I would have you expelled." "Now, Gemma," the other student said. He had a quiet but sure voice, confident enough in himself that he saw no need to raise his pitch, Dazai thought. "Let's consider this situation carefully." She didn't even look up at him. Gemma's attention was on Dazai and Dazai alone. "I told you I've had problems with him in the past, Gabriel. This is his third strike. I'm hardly too quick on the trigger." The Hufflepuff, Gabriel, Dazai supposed, huffed. "A fair consideration of events," Gabriel continued, unperturbed. "You know, when I was younger, being too quick to anger landed me in terrible fight with a Ravenclaw prefect." "You tell everyone that story," Gemma grunted. "I don't care." She took a step forward that Gabriel sniffed at. "And it has never been relevant when you tell it. It's not relevant now." Dazai didn't perk up. He'd been at attention ever since Gemma appeared. But he did raise his hands placatingly. Gemma didn't look to believe his innocence. "We tracked the monster's location here, only to find you. Do you have something to do with this?" Though Gemma didn't move, Dazai's eyes still wandered to the hall around them. Empty, save for them, and still scattered with the remains of a once bustling train. Each closed compartment must have held 3 or 4 terrified students. Dazai dropped his hands uselessly. "I'm innocent as always. We were only looking out." Hermione piped up, looking a little frantic. Dazai doubted she'd ever really been in trouble before. "This is our compartment here," She tapped the door Egg was currently hiding behind. And we're just checking to see if the monster was still here. Only to find my least favorite prefect, Dazai drawled. His eyes snapped to Gabriel, who stiffened upon having Dazai's attention. And her friend, I'm delighted to meet you, Mr. Dazai, he said, not sounding delighted in the slightest. His voice was still lofty and soft. I've heard so much about you. My name is Gabriel Truman. Hufflepuff prefect. Dazai raised a brow. Someone who wasn't afraid of the demon student. Still, Gabriel's smile was grossly condescending. Dazai decided to ignore him. He turned back to Gemma to see her glaring a hole in his head. I think Hogwarts has an infestation of fire salamander bats. That's hardly my fault. Gemma's brows shot into her hairline. Fire salamander bats. That isn't a real thing. Dazai shook his head, fervent. It is. You should write this down. Identifying the infestation is the first step to cleaning it up. That's true. Hermione clambered to back up Dazai's lie. About the infestation thing, not the salamander bat thing. She glanced to Dazai. Gemma's right about those not existing. The monster is more likely some form of fairy. Gabriel made a considering face at that, while Gemma frowned, disbelieving. But Dazai was miles ahead of them, brain coursing through hundreds of thoughts per second. A giddy idea burst to mind. Oh! Dazai jumped so excitedly and suddenly that both Gemma and Gabriel startled back a full step each. It's Lockhart's fault! The Cornish pixies! Hermione nodded several times. She was instantly on the same page as him. It must be. Oh, I know he never caught them all. That doesn't sound like my eyewitness reports at all, Gemma countered, sounding a bit caught off guard. But she was no less severe for it. Dark, large, smelled distinctly of smoke. Yeah, that sounds right, Dazai agreed. Cornish pixies are blue. Not this one. Lockhart painted it. I saw him do it, Dazai lied. Lockhart deserved whatever backlash came from this. Honestly, it was a little validating to just bold-face make things up about the man who was constantly making things up about him. But Lockhart made the pixies so mad, it threw over a candlestick and burnt his robes. Dark and smoky. This must be Lockhart's fault. Gabriel cleared his throat. Professor Lockhart, he said pointedly, is not on this train. Dazai shrugged. It happened yesterday. The pixie must have hidden in someone's luggage, only to wreak havoc when they opened their bag, Hermione agreed. It makes perfect sense, Dazai spoke over Gemma and Gabriel's wide-eyed staring. He turned a grinning look onto Hermione. We make a good team, Hermione. Have you ever thought of being a detective? She batted his arm, clearly exasperated beneath a deep desire to keep out of trouble. The path to safety in this case was mired in lies and deception. Gemma stared them down, like she was assessing the truth with her eyes alone. Her eyes went to Dazai first. He was all cheeky grins and bouncy feet. She would get nothing out of him. Then, Gemma turned to Hermione. The weak link. Hermione was clever and daring, but she was in no way a good liar. A quick fib didn't need to hold up to much scrutiny. This lie did. Dazai chirped up, snapping the prefect's attention back to him before. Hermione's quivering eyes could give the lie away. But if Gemma has this one covered, we'll head back to the safety of our room. I can only solve so many mysteries before Snape hunts me down to pester me. It worked like a charm. At once, Gemma and Gabriel were focused on him again. You'd better get to finding this pixie now. Before someone gets hurt, Dazai poked. No one will get hurt on my watch, Gemma said. Just as she spoke, a young Ravenclaw suddenly peeked their head out a door down the hall. The prefects both turned to him, saw the frightened look on his face, and the smudge of soot on his cheek. He had his hands wrapped around his wand protectively. Gemma clicked her tongue. Abruptly, she whirled on Dazai. You, she said, stern, keep out of trouble. Don't think we're not keeping an eye on you. Dazai raised a pacifying hand. You're the boss, Gemma grunted. Then she nudged Gabriel in the side. Let's go. The sooner we find this pixie, the sooner everyone will be out of danger. Gabriel hummed. That does seem more pertinent at the moment. He cast a final thoughtful glance over Dazai and Hermione. His eyes lingered over them for a second too long, assessing. Then he smiled prettily for Gemma. "Did I ever tell you the story of the time I traded my wand to a forest fairy?" "No one asked." "Gabriel," Gemma said. And then, they were gone. Dazai watched them for a moment longer, as the prefects stopped to question another student. The Ravenclaw pointed to a spot down the hall, then shrugged. Gemma glanced over her shoulders. Her eyes found Dazai's immediately and narrowed. Dazai rolled his shoulders back. "Oh, that was awful." Hermione keened now they were out of hearing range. Dazai raised a brow. He grinned. "It wasn't so bad. Gemma's pretty easy to manipulate once you figure out her weak spot." Hermione stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Never mind that," he said. "Let's duck back in here with Egg until those two clear out." She startled. "Is that safe?" "Sure is. Me and Egg had a good talk and she's all right now." Though Hermione didn't seem quite believing, she still followed him without complaint as he opened the door again and stepped back into it. He shut it when they were both inside. At some point, Egg had moved from the floor to the seats. She was now sitting primly by the window, but she perked up eagerly at Dazai's return. Hermione blinked several times. Egg is calmed down? How? Dazai wiggled his fingers in the air without explanation. Hermione narrowed a look onto him that Dazai pointedly ignored. "We'll sit for a few minutes until Gemma and Gabriel are gone. Then I'll need you to sneak out and grab Luna's bag from Draco's compartment, so I have something to smuggle her out in." With that, Dazai took a seat at Egg's side. "Say," he said, "you can cast the locking charm again, can't you? I'd rather die than have Pansy or Gemma barge in again. Although, what are the odds Pansy just kills me herself? That wouldn't be so bad." Hermione shot him a silencing glare, but she cast the charm regardless. "I can't believe I just lied to prefects," she grumbled, wand raised. "First the test answer keys, now this." As for the mission to secretly smuggle Egg out of Hogwarts, Dazai was tentatively calling this one a success, terrified classmates and suspicious prefects notwithstanding. The train arrived to station an hour later. Dazai had changed out of his robes shortly after Hermione went to fetch Luna's bag. By the time she returned, he was dressed in his usual mafia fare instead: white button-up, dark slacks, suit jacket. A tie was tight against his neck. Hermione commented, as they waited to unboard, "You look like you're going somewhere fancy." Dazai glanced down at himself, then back to her. "You think?" She nodded. "Where are you headed?" "Airport, then Yokohama," he told her. "You?" She raised a brow at his lack of explanation but didn't press. "Home, naturally. My parents will be waiting outside the barrier to pick me up." Dazai hummed acknowledgement. He would be, taking a taxi, which was by far preferable to the limousine he'd ridden home last year. Mori had been with him after all. This time, it was a quiet taxi ride, then an even quieter plane ride. The Port Mafia's private jet was lovely, Dazai had always thought. It was sleek and silent. Dazai had indulged himself many times in the thought that one day it might just drop out of the sky and kill him on impact with the ground. Bloody and gruesome, and too quick to hurt, hopefully. Of course, the odds of that happening were terribly unlikely. But at least the Port Mafia security wouldn't raise too many brows when he included a dragon among his luggage. Speaking of, Egg was once again curled up secretly in Luna's too large bag. Dazai made sure it was as securely closed as possible, and that the train station was as empty as it could get. Then, he nodded to Hermione. "Let's head out, then. Wouldn't want to worry your parents." Hermione undid the lock on their door. She and Dazai walked down the mostly empty corridor, and made work of ignoring the evidence of Egg's panic around them. Dazai carefully stepped around a bag, left behind in someone's haste. "They'll be fine, really," she said. "I'm more concerned you'll miss your flight home, Dazai." Dazai flapped a hand, disarming her worries casually. "'S not an issue. The real issue was leaving the train station without getting into too much trouble. Between the Daily Prophet's slander and the dragon currently hiding in his bag, Dazai was just asking for trouble waltzing around in public like he was. Hermione guided them out of the train. She walked them along a back wall, where passerbys were too involved in their own doings to pay them any mind. In the bustle of the crowd, Dazai recognized only one face, Lucius Malfoy. He was standing beside a rather severe-looking woman, Pansy's mother, he supposed. Draco, Pansy, and Blaise were gathered with them. Dazai wondered what all they were discussing, but by the fill of Draco's shoulders, Dazai didn't think it was anything his friend was happy with. Similarly, Dazai was glad he didn't have to juggle a conversation like that right now. Ducking around the crowd was a blessing. Dazai silently thanked Hermione for her consideration, and before he knew it, they were passing through the magical gateway into the Muggle world. Dazai shivered as the last of that foreign magic shrugged off of him. "All right?" "Sure," he said, mostly telling the truth. The discomfort now beating at his whole body was more disorientating than painful, for now. He looked around. "Where are your folks?" Hermione bounced. "Oh, around here somewhere." She searched around herself. "You should meet them. Mom and Dad are always saying they want to meet my friends." Dazai nodded absent-mindedly, though he truly had no desire to do so. He was still looking around the Muggle station. The people here didn't even spare them a passing glance. And, realizing this, the anchor that had weighed on Dazai's chest for the last several months lifted ever so slightly, but only slightly. The dark shadow always hanging over him persisted like a bad cough. Dazai cleared his throat, smoky. "Maybe next time," he said, smiling. At Hermione's deflated look, he continued, "You're right. I shouldn't miss my plane." Hermione nodded in understanding, though she seemed somewhat upset at having been turned down. Her curls bounced. For once, she teased. "You say something responsible." Dazai grinned. "All right then. It was lovely chatting with you, Dazai, if not terribly stressful." She made a face. "But never mind that now. Have a good break?" "You too," he smiled. "See you in a few weeks. Let me know if you have any grand realizations about transfiguration when we meet next." "Of course." They giggled, said another goodbye, and departed. Dazai watched Hermione disappear into the crowd, and only turned away when he saw her hug a man with curls like her own. Then he was alone. Solitude in the midst of a bustling train station. Dazai sighed. His good humor from before vanished, replaced by something altogether less emotive and more so akin to a cat soaked from cold rains. It was time to go back home. And just like last year, Dazai wondered why it felt like he must be drowning. He hailed a taxi with a raised hand. Home sweet home. That night, Dazai bent over his desk. It was scratched and stained, old and used. Dazai knew the grooves by heart, and knew how if you pressed back against the leftmost drawer, a secret compartment would pop open. Dazai bowed over it as if in prayer. The desk lamp turned everything red. Dazai flipped open Ginny's diary. "And your name would be?" Tom Riddle had waited for his answer all day. "I'll tell you my name," Dazai at last wrote back. "But only if you answer my question first. I'm your diary now. You can ask me anything you would like," Dazai penned. "Are you—" a pause. "I'm afraid I don't understand your question. Are you a diary?" The room was silent except for the sound of pens scratching against paper. A few seconds after each response was penned, it would bleed away into nothing. The page would be empty once again. He wrote, "I don't make a habit of introducing myself to inanimate objects or to strange creatures, but a person's consciousness, living suspended in the pages of a diary, I might introduce myself to them." Everything was dark, everything was red. A clock ticked somewhere nearby, and the room was cold with Yokohama winter. "Clever boy," said Tom Riddle. "Dazai-osamu. Then it's a pleasure to formally meet you, Dazai-osamu."
Thank you and subscribe for more Bungo Stray Dogs fanfictions. Let me know what was your favorite scene.